So I feel the need to begin with an apology of sorts. I'm going to be talking for the next 6 minutes and 20 some odd seconds about active experiential learning, but there's going to be nothing active about it for you all or experiential for you all, so for that, I'm very sorry. So I'm going to be talking about game-based learning, and game-based learning is basically using games that have been designed with specific learning outcomes in the classroom to teach specific disciplinary content and skills to your students. One of the probably best known learning games on the market right now is the Reacting to the Past series. This is a game that takes students and puts them into specific historical events and has them play out these events as historical figures. And as the slide says there, it is a role-playing game. Now, role-playing games are basically collaborative stories. Most of the players in a role-playing game take on specific roles, and you typically have one person who is in control of adjudicating the rules and controlling the rest of the world. Probably the oldest and certainly right now the most popular tabletop role-playing game is Dungeons & Dragons. It's experiencing a pretty big resurgence right now thanks to web series like Critical Role and Stranger Things. And my favorite example of the height of its popularity right now is that the fast food franchise Wendy's has invested the time and money and frankly the resources to create its own role-playing game. You can go to this website and download this game for free. And if you can stomach the fast food puns, it's worth the play. So the game that I use in the classroom is called Dungeon World. It is a game that is like Dungeons & Dragons, so it's high fantasy, elves, dwarves, dragons. But it's created with fiction-first principles. So rules light, narrative heavy. That's why I use it in the classroom. The game that I've designed the first game I designed for my classroom is for my professional responsibility course. Right now it's called World of Professionals. This course is a 200-level course, and it teaches workplace ethics, basically. So there are a couple of reasons I started using game-based learning in this course. One is that when I started teaching this course, I found that my students had a lot of inconsistency in their ethical reasoning. They would make an argument one week that they would then contradict the next week, and so I had to try to figure out a way that they could see what consistent ethical thinking looked like. Another thing is that because this class is called professional responsibility, it's not focused on engineering ethics or business ethics or medical ethics. I've got to cover a lot of stuff. And given the number of students I have in the room, there's no way I can cover all of the professions they're going to go into. So I had to come up with something, so I started stealing things from Dungeons & Dragons and games like it. So for the first third of our class, we go through character creation. Like I said, RPGs are like a collaborative story. So my students need to create characters. The first thing that I kind of took from role-playing games for this character creation, those familiar with Dungeons & Dragons, you know that your characters have a worldview, an alignment. I took this out and I shoved ethical theory in there. So all of my students get an ethical theory that they're responsible for. I've got Kant, I've got utilitarianism, contractarianism, care ethics, virtue ethics. The next thing I did was I took these fantasy medieval professions and I gave them a real-world analog. So we've got the legal profession for our knights, the engineering profession for our artificers, business for merchants, medicine for clerics, and education for the wizards. So, after they've got their character, we spend the center part of the course going on adventures. The first adventures we go on are dungeon crawls. These are basically virtual escape rooms. You've got to solve puzzles to get out of the room. And the way that I use it in the classroom is that I tie this to the readings we do for the course. So if they do the readings beforehand and take their individual quiz, hopefully they've learned what they need to learn so they can then come to class the next day and play through the game. If they've learned what they needed, they solve the puzzles, they escape the rooms. If they didn't, they don't. The next thing I did is we have what I call monster encounters. In these Dungeons and Dragons-like games, monster encounters are just what it sounds like. You encounter a monster. For the classroom, I basically fictionalize philosophical thought experiments and case studies for the professions. So what they do on these days is they come to the classroom, I give them their fictionalized case study or thought experiment. They write about it for 5 minutes. They then talk about it in their professional guilds with those who share their ethic and their profession, and then we debate it in class. And we see what we think is the best explanation for how we ought to solve this case study or thought experiment. Okay, so in the last minute I have here, I'd like to just encourage you all to think about using games in the classroom. And I'm going to give you 2 resources that are available at UT that you can use to help you do that. So the first resource, and this is what I started using when I first brought games to the classroom, was TLI. Games, simulations, and role-playing are one of the recognized types of experiential learning at UT. Last spring, I and a colleague in history, Marina Makari-Clayton, we ran a workshop that helped people design games for the classroom through TLI, and I'm hoping to do the same with OIT in the spring. The other plug I'm going to give here is for our simulations, gaming, and role-playing community of scholars. We meet as regularly as we can to talk about using games in the classroom. So if you're interested in that, please contact me, and I'll stick you on the mail list. Thank you.